So we began the 10th parak Elohei Hanechnokim, and we're up to Pei Daled Amid Beis the Ema. So this is approximately parallel to Tosis Dibra Maskal Man, and we're talking about Makeh Aviv V'Imo. We're trying to define what exactly is Makeh Aviv. So the Gemara says as follows: the Ema, perhaps we should say that Makeh Aviv is Chayav Misafagav Delo Avid Bei Chabura, even if he doesn't wound his father. And the pasuk doesn't say that we're talking dafka about the case where he made a chabura in it. Right? We had the pasuk of Makeh Aviv and Alama Tanan, and yet our Mishnah says later on Pei Hey, Makeh Aviv Imo Enechayvat Shiyasa B'hem Chabura. So there must be a pasuk that tells me that just Hakah itself would not generate a chiyuv misa. And the Gemara answers, Amakra u'makeh adam yumas. And the pasuk says at the end of Emor, if a person hits a human being, he will be put to death. U'makeh behema yishalmenu. If he kills an animal, he has to pay compensation for the animal. And we have here a hekesh. Ma makeh behema. Adi Aviv B'Chabura. We know that in the case of Makeh behema, he doesn't have to pay compensation unless he makes a chabura and he wounds the animal. The chsiv ba pasuk says over there in Emor, u'makeh nefesh behema. Nefesh is dam, because the pasuk in Dvarim Yud Beis says ki adamu and nefesh is af makeh adam, and here makeh adam means Makeh Aviv is adi avid chabura, until he takes out the dam, which is the nefesh, and that's called a chabura. So if let's say a person is Makeh Avimo and he doesn't make a chabura, then he has the same status as Makeh Chavero, and he pays for Nezik Tzari Puy Sheves and Boshas, the 5 categories of Chavola. And if, let's say, there was no hefsed in this hakavish of a proof, then he gets malchus, because once he's paying, we say eino loke mishalim. Maskin for Rabbi Yirmiyah elameata. If it's really true that the chiyuv of Makeh behema is only if he wounds the animal, hikchisha ba'avonim hachinami delo machayev. Are you going to tell me that let's say he damages the animal by, hitting the animal with stones, and the animal doesn't bleed, but it's very weak, and he didn't make a chabura, is he potur? And that doesn't make any logical sense. The animal is weak. It's been weakened by a Masechet. Why shouldn't he be paying for the compensation for the animal? And therefore, Rabbi Yirmiyah, based on this kasha, the Gemara concludes that Makeh behema is chayiv even if he does not make a chabura. And if that be the case, then we need to find a substitute yalfusa to teach us that Makeh Aviv is only chayiv if he makes chabura. You can't derive it from an equation to Makeh behema. So the Gemara answers, Elim eino inyu lenefesh behema dahi inami akhisha bavonim chayiv tneu inyu lenefesh adam. Right, that the pasuk says Makeh nefesh behema, correct? Let's go back to the pasuk. It says Makeh adam yumas and Makeh behema yishalmena. And with regard to behema, it says Makeh nefesh behema, but the word nefesh is not meant to teach us that he's only chayav compensation in Makeh nefesh if the behema was wounded and blood came out, because that we know he's chayav even Bizarre all of avonim. So what do we do with the word nefesh in the parsha of Makeh nefesh behema? And that's called the Meno Inyan. I mean, one of course wonders why the Torah, in a sense, confuses us by telling us Makeh nefesh behema, when the word nefesh really reflects on Adam in the case of Aviv ve'ima. That's a question. Gemara says, so to what extent do we equate Makeh Adam and Makeh behema? It's not with regard to Chabura, because Makeh behema does not require a Chabura. And the Gemara answers, L'chidisanya debei Chizkiah. So this has to do with the principle of Kim Le B'derabamine. Kemo Makeh behema achiv tashlum bein b'mezid bein b'shogeg. So this is even before Kim Le B'derabamine. In other words, we have a principle called Adam Muad Liolam, and that covers even a case of Shogeg. And so too, in a case of Horeg B'mezid, so let's just see what happens over here. So with regard to Makeh behema, Adam Muad Liolam, and a person pays damages, even if he was a shogeg, even if he accidentally damaged somebody's animal. Now, in Makeh Adam, we have the opposite. He's potter from tashlumin. Why? Because Makeh Adam would generate a chiv misa, and the chiv misa knocks off the chiv tashlumin. And once again, we're going to establish, like we did in Adam Muad Liolam by Makeh behema, that ein hevdil bein mezid l'shogeg. Whether it's a mezid or a shogeg, he is still potter from tashlumin. So if a person kills someone b'shogeg, he is potter from tashlumin. And he says the following. In the footnote number Chav Gimel, he quotes the halacha of Kim Le B'derabamine, and he gets the more severe punishment, again, in the case of Mezid, for example, he's Chayv Misa, and he doesn't pay damages. And this is derived in the Gemara Ksubas Lamed Vav from the Pasuk in Shmos Chaf Aleph, Lo Yeh Ason Anoshi Anesh. And the Gemara there in Ksubas on Daf Lamed Zayin brings an additional source from the Pasuk V'Pilu HaShofet V'Yikol Lefanim K'dei Rishasu B'Mispar Mishum Risha Achas Atom Mechayvo V'Iyah Atom Mechayvo Mishum Shtei Rishoyos. And the Brisa of the Bei Chizkiah is coming to tell you that applies even in the case of Shogeg. Okay, so now we have a definite halacha derived from the hekesh between Makeh behema and Makeh Adam. But the Gemara in Ksubas on Daf Lamed Daled quotes a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about Tana Devei Chizkiah. Hanicha lamandi islay Tana Devei Chizkiah. Everything you say makes sense according to Reish Lakish, who accepted Tana Devei Chizkiah. And I need the hekesh to Makeh behema to teach me that a rotzeach is potter from tashlum. Elaman de Leslie Tana Devei Chizkiah. Rabbi Yochanan rejects Tana Devei Chizkiah, that derivation. And in fact, according to Rabbi Yochanan, rotzeach b'shogeg is chayav v'tashlumin. Is once again we go back to square one. Akeisha lovely. What do I derive in Makeh Adam from the case of mazik behema? We're not going to derive the chiyuv, or shall we say in Makeh Adam, the ptur of shogeg, because Rabbi Yochanan rejects Tana Devei Chizkiah. So the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan is going to derive from this hekesh a different halacha. Ma Makeh behema l'refuah potu. Af Makeh Adam l'Refua Potter. So now we're talking about a veterinarian, like an animal doctor, who, within the course of administering some sort of a healing process to the animal, he actually damages the animal. And when he removes the blood from the animal to check the blood or to lower the blood pressure, he was Makeh b'behema. Somehow he damaged the animal. And the law is that he's potter. In other words, they hired his services to be Makeh's dam, and he did the best he could. And within the context of his professional healing process, even though he was mazik, he doesn't have to pay damages. And Rabbi Yochanan is going to derive from the hekesh to Makeh Adam, which again, as we said, means Makeh Aviv, that if he was a physician and he makes a chabur in his father by letting blood out, then he's potter. Now, in the Masechet number Chaf Hey, he quotes the Chidushei Aran, who says, "Umuta lasos came." This is a major issue as to whether or not a father can avail himself of the medical benefits or services of his son, who's a physician, in a case where his son will have to take blood out of his father's body. The Ran is matir. Not everyone is so excited about it. And let's look at the Gemara. The Boilu, the Gemara has a suffix ben mao shiak is damli aviv. If the son is a physician, is he allowed to take blood out of his father's body, making a chabur in his father's body, b'makom hatzorech, for the sake of refuah? And l'chora, we have an answer to this iboilahu based on this hekesh of Rabbi Yochanan. However, Rav Masda derives the same halacha from a different source. And the pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," and all the isurim of beinon lechavero are defined in the light of "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha." Don't do to your friend what you wouldn't want your friend to do to you. But in the case of akozes dam, which has a positive purpose, the ben would want his blood to be removed, and therefore he's allowed to remove his father's blood, again for the greater sake of refuah. However, Rav Dimi Bar Chinina comes back to the drasha of Rabbi Yochanan. Makeh Adam u'Makeh behema, the hekesh between the two, Makeh behema l'refuah potur, af Makeh Adam l'refuah potur. Rav lo sharik librei l'mishkal le silva. He had a thorn stuck in his body, and he didn't allow his son to remove the thorn from his body. And so too, Mar Berei Ravina, lo shavik librei lemiftach le kavsa. He would not allow his son to open up some sort of a wound in order to remove the pus that had accumulated in the infected wound. And in all these cases, the reason is one and the same. Dilma chavil, havile shigas iser. He's running the danger, the risk of wounding his father, whether by removing this coat or by removing the pus from this wounded and infected kvir. And because of Dilma Chavil, because you're treading on dangerous ground, Havile Shigas Isur, he will violate B'shogeg, the Isur of Makeh Aviv. So it's not the way we saw early in the name of the Ran, that it's mutter for a son to administer medical procedure to his father by making a chabura and be make his dam. We're not going to allow that. Because here we're talking about a beneficial act of removing a coats or removing the pus from the infected wound. And now we're worried that it might come to a shigas iser if accidentally he removes the dam and he's chovel b'avid. Now it doesn't mean that Rav and Mori Breit Ravino rejected the drasha that we had earlier of Rav Masna and Rav Dim Bar Chinina, that chavola b'avid muteres l'tzorch refuah, but they were worried about a tipul b'kotzu b'kaviyah as opposed to hakozas dam. Now, what's the difference between the two? What's the difference between a chavola b'aviv l'tzorch refuah, which we said earlier in the name of Rav Masna and Rav Dimi is mutter, and again we're adding the chidush Aran. And yet, in the cases of coats and kviyah, we were choshesh that maybe he'll remove dam. And it seems that the answer is that in the case of removing the dam from his father, that is a meiser refuah. Here we're afraid that he might come to remove dam when there's no need to remove dam. He may come inadvertently to remove the dam. He's really meant to remove the coats or the pus, but he may come accidentally to remove dam. The Rama paskins in Hilchos Man Perkei that we don't allow lechatchila the son to remove the coats, but the Beis Yosef in Yoredei Sima Reish Mem Aleph interprets the Rif and the Rosh as saying that Rav Umari Breit Ravina disagree with the heter of Makeh of L'Refuah, and they hold that even lahakis dam le'aviv is also prohibited, despite the fact that it's chabura l'tzorach refuah. So the question of a son who's a physician to remove dam from his father for the purpose of medical treatment is not a simple matter. The Gemara asks, "Hachi acher nami." Wait a second. While it's true that there's an iser misa, a capital crime, if he removes dam from his father, and that's called chovel b'aviv makeh aviv. But nevertheless, even with regard to Yisrael, if you remove his blood, you wound him, you violate a lav doraisa of lo Yosef. So there's an iser doraisa of chovel b'chavera. And if you're afraid in shogeg he might come to be motzi dam, then that should be prohibited even lechavero, because you have a chash of violating a lav doraisa. We never found that refuah is prohibited, and in many procedures of medical nature, there's a chash that maybe he might remove the dam. Like, for example, even if you go to a podiatrist today, if the podiatrist will start scraping your skin and removing corns and what do we call it, different kinds of fungus, he may come to remove dam. It's a violation of Pen Yosef. In the case of a dentist, for example, I don't have to tell you how frequent it is that the dentist will remove a tooth, or even less profound kind of procedures, he'll remove dam. So are we going to say that there too we have a chash of a shogeg, of violation of chavola, of chovel b'chaver lo Yosef, and therefore it should be also? I mean, basically you're going to prohibit the entire enterprise of refuah. It's almost always the case that maybe not a chiropractor, I don't know, but I don't have to tell you, there's been cases where a barber who was cutting someone's hair actually cut his ear. I don't know if you ever saw such a thing. So the Gemara answers, you cannot equate the two Isurim of Pen Yosef in the case of Acherim and Makeh Aviv, because Acher, in the case that maybe Chas v'Sholom will be Chovel b'Chavero b'Shogeg, that's called Shigas La. So even if he was Chovel, it's only a Shigas La. But Beno is Shigas Chenek. That we have to treat with a great deal of severity. Shigas Chenek. Now we get to Hilchas Shabbos. Now, if on Shabbos you remove dam, that's netilas neshama ki adamu nefesh, and that's a violation of one of the 39 malachas for disnan. And yet we learned in a Mishnah in Shabbos Kuf Chav Beis with regard to removing something that got caught, a thorn in someone's body, is machat shel yad lito bas hakots. You're permitted on Shabbos to take a needle, which normally would be, let's say, a klisha malachto le'iser, and you can use it l'shem gufo, l'tzarek gufo, as an instrument to remove a coat. Now, if you're telling me that shigas chenek generates a chashash whenever you're removing a coat, like in the case of Ben Li Aviv, then on Shabbos, we're talking about a shigas skila. Lechush dilma chavil v'havi le shigas skila. Okay, you were matir using a klisha malachta le'isul etzar gufo. But what about the procedure itself of removing a coat? Shouldn't we be afraid that he might be chovel? Bishkaga, he might remove blood. And by violating the Isur Chabala, which is Netilas Neshama, he is a Shigas Skila, Avile Shigas Skila. And the Gemara answers, Hasa Mekalkel, who on Shabbos we have a special halacha called Meleches Machsheves, and if he inadvertently removes the dam, that's called Mekalkel. That's not a Meleches Machsheves. So a healthy person wants all the blood in his body. He doesn't want to give up any blood. And by taking his blood unnecessarily, that's called mekalkel. It's interesting, the Gemara in Shabbos, if I recall, has a case where he removes the dam in order to feed it to a kelev, and that might make it into a tikkun, a meleches tikkun. But that depends upon the famous sugya called malacha shenitzricha legufa. Now, is it that he needs the dam, or he wants the dam to be removed from the body? The Gemara asks a kasha here on Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon is the one who holds mekalkel b'chaburas chayet. Lemandi ohanich lemandi o mekalkel patur, and even in chabura, if you're mekalkel, you're patur. And that's the shita of Yehuda. Elamandi Omer Chayev Michael Meimar. According to Reb Shimon, who disagrees with Reb Yehuda, then he holds that mekalkel is the exception to. I'm sorry, that chabura is the exception to the rule. And as far as Chabur is concerned, when you take out the dam, you're chayav from Melechas Shabbos, even though it's Mekalkel. So here also we have a shigas, a chashash shigas skila. And the Gemara answers, Man shamet le di omer kal Chabura chayav Rab Shimoni. Who is the man the omer holds Mekalkel Chabur is chayav? That's Rab Shimon. And here we turn to Daf Hey. Rab Shimon ha'omar kol Mekalkel shenetzrich kol melech shenetzrich legufa poter ale. He doesn't need the dam. He's not using the dam to feed, his dog. And therefore it becomes a melacha shenetzrich legufa. He's doing it for the purpose of the gufa adam, right? His client that he's trying to improve his health. He's not taking the dam because he needs the dam. And therefore, even though Reb Shimon holds Mekalkel b'Chabura chayav, but not in the case of Malacha shenetzricha legufa. So if he's taking out the dam because he needs the dam, even though he is Mekalkel b'Chabura, the person whose dam he's removing suffers a kilkul, so he'd be chayav for that, but he's potter for a different reason, not because of Mekalkel, but rather because of Melech Shein Tzricha Legufa. If on the other hand he needs the dam, then that would be Melech Tzricha Legufa, because Ki Adam Hu Nefesh defines the dam as the chefetz of the Melech. So therefore, what are we worried about? If you remove the coats on Shabbos, we're worried about a scenario in which you might come to remove dam, but you have no need for that dam. So either it's Mekalkel and there's no shigas skila, or it's a Melech Shein Tzricha Legufa, and therefore it's not a shigas skila. So if you go like Rabbi Yehuda, then we're going to assume that Mekalkel applies to Chovel. And if you were damaging, then you chayav from meleches. Then you potter meleches chovel because of mekalkel. And even if you go like Reb Shimon who holds the mekalkel chabur is chayav, you would still be potter under a different category called melech shein tzricha legufa. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold from melech shein tzricha legufa. According to Rabbi Yehuda, melech shein tzricha legufa is chayav. Boy, mi name Rav Sheshes. Ben Maushiyase Shliach Li Aviv Lakoso Ulakalalo. Wow. Can a Ben serve as the Shliach Bezdin to mete out a punishment to his own father by giving him Malchus? I would say for sure this is also. Let's just see. Lakalalo means Lenadoso. Now let's just see, is Lenadoso Osur? The Orchel Ner says, what do you mean? What does Klola have to do with Nidui? We don't find it in Nidui there's a Klola. All right, so we have to say that Lekalo probably means Levazoso by putting him into Nidui. Amalahu Rav Sheshes responds to the question of the Talmidim of the Bnei Yeshiva, the Acher mi hitiro el kvod shamayim odif hochanami kvod shamayim odif. Wow, Rav Sheshes is going to be mad to this. Why? He says even the shliach of Bezdin is violating the iser of Lal Koso, which is Pen Yosef, and Linadoso of being mavaza someone by putting him into Nidu. Take a look at number Zion here. Hamakar lazeu b'gemar li'el, achsham lo matzinu ken. All right, there's a problem here with Rashi. But be that as it may, the matir of a shliach bezdin in general, no matter whether it's his father or someone else, is kvod shamayim. And kvod shamayim is going to trump any prohibition of hakah or klol. And so too, if kvod shamayim is adif, it's going to apply even in the case of kvod aviv. And therefore he's permitted to become a shliach bezdin, lal koso ulin adoso. Now, if you take a look in footnote number ches, he says the following. In the case of Malchus, there's a mitzvah saseh, arboim yakenu, and that overrides the lo saseh of lo Yosef, because that's the principle of esei dochalosa. But if, as far as a ben to his father, there it's a lav sheyesh lo misas bezdin, because Makeh Aviv is chayv chenek. And we don't say that an essay could be dochalosa sheyesh bo misa, like, for example, Shabbos. So if Rav Sheshes had only mentioned lal koso, meaning to give Malchus, then we would certainly apply the principle of essay. Just 1 second. We could not apply the principle of essay dochalosas. But Rav Sheshes brought a raya from Nidu, and Nidu doesn't have a mitzvah aseh. Not exactly sure why Malchus has a mitzvah say and not Nidu. I mean, they're both punishments of Bezdin, but in any event, let's assume that that's correct. So therefore, Rav Sheshes in the case of Nidu is going to say Kvod Shamayim Odif. And therefore, we should apply that even in the case of Aviv. Let me just share with you an idea that crossed my mind. I can't prove this to you, but I think maybe what Rav Sheshes is saying here is Kvod Shamayim and Hakah are mutually exclusive. When the Torah prohibits Makeh Aviv or Pen Yosef L'gabi Chavero, it doesn't include a case of Kvod Shamayim. And that's what we saw already in a different form in the case of Hakozas Dam. You remember that we permitted a ben to be Makeh's Dam Li'aviv. What about the Isser Makeh Aviv? But the answer is that's not the Hakah that the Torah prohibited, because he's just removing the blood for health purposes. And here too, he is doing this action of Malchus for Kvod Shamayim. And if it's Kvod Shamayim, it doesn't fall under the category. It's not defined as Makeh Aviv. So now we're up to Masechet. All right, I think we'll stop here. Let's make a note of where we got to. Here on the top of Pei Hey Amud Aleph. And let's just figure out the schedule for tomorrow. Let's see, tomorrow I give a shir at 11 o'clock. Let's see, the 9:35 shir we could have. Maybe we'll be able to fit in a little bit more of Sanhedrin after Ashir and Psach. We'll see about it tomorrow. And then at 11 o'clock, I give a shir in Sefer Mitzvahs, the Ramban, and his critique of the Rambam and his defense of the Baha'i. And then I give a Ramban shir in Hebrew, Ramban al Torah. Okay then, so thank you very much and have a great day.